Arrays by themselves can be helpful and they can be useful, but what really unlocks their potential is using them in the context of loops and using loops to process them. That's what we're going to talk about now. I'm assuming here that you already have a basic understanding of what arrays are and a basic understanding of how to create them in Java. So if that's not the case, you need to stop here and go back and watch those videos and then come back and we'll be ready to go. The other thing I want to mention before we jump in is that the Java developers have created some tools that will do some of the things we're going to do in our lesson for us. For example, the arrays class does some of this stuff. And I want to acknowledge that that's out there and that if you're writing code in a production environment or if you're writing code outside of class, that's probably really useful for you. Unfortunately, I need to assess your ability to do things with loops yourself, not to call a method that does it for you. So I'm going to ask you to write that code yourself rather than using the arrays class or some other class you find that will do some of this work for you. That's why the assignments are worded in a way that require loops. And I just think it's important to acknowledge that. It's not like I don't know those things exist, and it's not like I don't think you would use those in the quote-unquote real world, but I have to see if you can write a loop that deals with an array. Okay, with all that said, let's take a look in Visual Studio Code how we can do this. All right, so I've just got a couple arrays here for us to work with. One is an array of strings and one is an array of doubles. And to start out with, let's just take a look at outputting one of these arrays. So if I just say output, print line team, let's go ahead and run that and see what we get. What you get is probably hard to even see what that is because it's mixed in with all that kind of compiler output, but let me show you here in a comment what we got. We got this weird looking set of information, and to make a long story short, what it says basically is that this is an array and it holds strings, and then this is the address in memory where that is stored. It's possibly useful to someone, but it's not really useful to us. It's certainly not useful to our user. So just printing out the array itself doesn't really give us something useful. If we want to print out what's in the array, that might be a little more useful. And it's going to be our first example of where we can create what we call a traversal loop. And so a traversal, I talked about that in an earlier video. It just means we're going to go through a loop and we're going to do something with every element in it. This is going to be done with a for loop. It could be a while loop. We're going to write it with a for loop. And it's a for loop that you're going to write so often that you will soon have it memorized. The idea here is that we need a loop that goes through every single valid index in our array. The first valid index is always 0, and the last valid index is always the length of our array minus 1. So I'll create a variable called I to be our counter, and I'll set it to 0. I is kind of a convention in programming. You can think of it as standing for like an iteration, or in the case of an array, I like to think of it as representing the index number, right? We're going to continue as long as I is less than the length of the array, and this array that we're going to traverse has 6. So I'm going to put a 6 there, and I'm going to add 1 with every iteration. So far so good, and in fact let's just try it. I'll system out print line team. Now we've worked with basic indexing before, and so that would print out the first element. But what it does is it prints that every single time. We want that index number to change. We really want it to be I. Okay, now this looks good. It actually works. I do have one thing I would like to refine on this, and that is this Boolean expression that says we're going to keep going as long as we are less than 6. We may not know the size of our array. Maybe while the program is running, we ask the user how big it needs to be, and then we create it. Or maybe we come back and change it and we add another name onto it. Now we know that an array is immutable from one of those earlier videos, so I can't just do this. at runtime. I can't just add a name on, but I can when I'm coding. I may come in and add this, and I may forget now to go back and find all of these traversals and remember to change that from a 6 to a 7. And then what happens 20 minutes later when I need to add another name? Now I got to go change them to 8. So what we do instead is we refer to the length of the array, and there is a property that will do that. So if I say the name of the array is team.length, in Java, that gives us the length of the array no matter what that is. And so I don't have to worry about it. I just know that that is always going to correctly traverse a loop. And all you ever have to, an array, excuse me, and all you ever have to change on this line of code is the name of the array here. So if I want to traverse through prices, and then I want to print out from prices, still works, okay? So that's a nice little tip to make sure that we are staying in bounds, as we say, and not using invalid index numbers. All right, I'm going to take a moment just to identify that as an output traversal, just for future reference, so we know that's what it is. And let's try another traversal, something that we can't really do with a string, but we could do with numbers. Maybe we want to know the sum of all of the values in that prices array. So this, I'm going to call this an accumulation traversal. We always use these funny words for this, right? So in order to get a total from this, I'm going to need a variable that we call an accumulator. In other words, the price, the total that we're adding up. So it's going to be a double, and I'm going to call it total price. And I'm going to set it to 0.0 to start out. And I'm going to use that same traversal code for int I equals 0. I is less than, in this case, prices.length. And we're going to say I plus plus. Okay. Now what I want to do, I don't want to print them out every time. What I want to do is add whatever the current price is onto that total price. So this is going to be an assignment statement. And there are going to be a couple ways to write this. I could say total price equals total price plus. Now I want to pull from prices. So prices at the current index. Okay. And then this, we don't want to print it here because that's going to show us kind of the work in progress. Or we can do that just to see. It helps sort of illustrate what's going on. So I guess we might as well print that out. So I'm going to put total equals plus total price. All right, let's go ahead and run this and see what we get. So at first it outputs outputs the team names, which is fine. And then it's going to output every iteration. It's going to say 199 and then 424, which is the total at that point. And so it gives us kind of a running total. That may not be exactly what we want. It might be what we want, but in this case, I really just want the total at the end. So this idea of an accumulator is not really done, or it's not really correct until the loop is finished. So we don't want to do anything with it until the loop is all done. So I'm just going to print out the total price down at the bottom. There we go, $21.71. I didn't add those up ahead of time to see if that's right, but I'm going to assume that that is correct because I have the luxury of not turning this in for an assignment. You, of course, should always be checking that stuff and not assuming that it is correct. But this is what we can call an accumulation traversal. And I'll point out, by the way, what if we wanted to figure out the average price? Well, the average price now is going to be the total price divided by the number of items in that array, which is prices.length. So if we took total price divided by prices.length, we would get an average. So that accumulation loop or traversal can be really helpful for a lot of different things. All right, let's see another example of a traversal. And this one, I don't know if I have a great name for this. This is going to be like a modifier traversal. I don't really talk about these in those terms, but just since I'm commenting what they all are, a traversal that goes through and somehow changes the values inside the array because they're not static. The array itself is immutable, but the contents within the array are not, and that's we're using immutables in a real specific way. But this is just going to be another traversal. Let's just say that we need to increase the prices by $1 each, inflation or whatever. Prices dot length I plus plus. You can already see, as promised, we're writing this for loop often here. So, all right. So what I want to do now is an assignment statement that changes each element of the array. So I'm going to say prices at index I equals prices. Oh, I was going to show you up here. We've done this kind of update with kind of the longhand way. We could also say total price plus equals prices. Sorry for going backwards here, but as I was writing the next line of code, I was realizing I never circled back and showed that. These two lines of code are equivalent, and most people are going to prefer the second one since it's less typing. And that's the one I'm going to use here. If I want to add $1 onto each price, then I'm just going to say plus equals 1.0. And now how do I know that worked? Well, I'm going to do a traversal loop that does output to C. So I'm going to copy and paste. I'm not a big fan of copying and pasting for beginning programmers, but it seems appropriate here since it's just that traversal. And I'm going to output the prices. One of the things that's going to happen is my output window down here is going to get to start looking pretty confusing. So I'm just going to add a little divider here. Oops. Almost thought I was in Python there for a second. Just so I can see the difference in that output. There we go. So each one of these now should be $1 more than where they started. So $2.99, $3.25, $3.99, and so on. So that has worked as well. Again, this is just showing that these variables that we've put into an array, these values that we've put into an array, we can still modify them. We can do anything with them that we could do with a regular double or a regular string or whatever that variable type is. All right, I paused recording so you wouldn't have to watch me type a bunch of stuff, but I have added code that's going to ask the user for a name, and we're going to use a traversal loop to see if that name is on our team. So I've just added the scanner stuff that should be pretty common or familiar to you by now. And I'm asking the user to type that name in. So we're going to use a traversal loop. We're going to say for int I equals 0, same old loop that we've been using. I is less than, I'm doing teams now. I'm back to teams. I said teams, but it's team, of course. And so what we're going to do now is inside this loop body, we're now going to do an if statement that checks to see if this name is the current element in the array. So we're going to start with an if statement, and now strings, we have to use dot equals in order to, sorry, I can't type and talk at the same time. In order to compare two strings, we can't just do, or we shouldn't just do this, for example, team I. There's a chance that might work depending on you're having to do with the way Java runtime handles strings, but it's not really going to work. So we have to do dot equals. It's just a quirk of the Java language. Most other languages don't really do it that way anymore. Okay. So if the search name is equal to the current name, the name at the current index, then let's just output system out print line. Let's print out yes, that name is on the team. Okay, let's go ahead and run this and see if it works. I didn't even think to test my code that I wrote while I was paused. So let's search for the name David, because I know that one is in there. Yes, that name is on the team. Now, what happens if we don't find a name? If I put Tim, nothing happens. We don't get any output. And so what students are tempted to do here is add an else statement, right? Okay, well, else I didn't find the name. Just copy that. No, not on the team. Okay, let's run that and see what we get. Try, first of all, I'll try Tim. No, not on the team. So not on the team that it repeats it a bunch of times. Let's try one that is on the team, David. It says, no, not on the team. Oops, found it. Then not on the team again. Remember, this if statement is happening inside of a loop. So it's going to keep going from there. And we have a couple different ways we can handle it. This might be one of those exceptions to my rule about not breaking out of a loop, right? We might break there. But I still want to be able to, all right, sorry, I put the break. See, I use these so infrequently, I didn't even use it right. That's not really going to accomplish exactly what we want since we're doing output. But what we might do instead is something like a Boolean variable. So we can say Boolean is found equals, and I'm going to set it to false. And then we're going to say, about that code for later. If the name is, now we're going to say is found equals true. And now after the loop, now that Boolean variable is essentially an accumulator, and it is not accurate, it's not complete until the loop is done. So I'm going to say, now I'm going to use that, sorry, it's like Frankenstein together my code here. I'm going to say if is found, then print yes, we're on the team, else print no, not on the team. So we're not going to print every time inside the loop at all. We're not going to print any information in the loop. We're just going to do the search, and then when we're done, we're going to take a look. Tim, nope, not on the team. Now the test is if this finds it and doesn't print anything out, yes, that name is on the team. Now this might indeed be a place for a break statement, right? Because once we found the name, we don't have to keep looking. So I might break there. I don't, in a case like this, a loop is like this, it's pretty basic. We don't need to really cut it off, but there's nothing wrong with that because loop's done, served its purpose now, it's done. So we could break it there if we want. I hit stop before I made a point that really where I was headed with this break statement is that we would say that this is an indefinite loop, right? We don't know how many times it's going to have to iterate before it finds something. So this is a case where I probably would really write this as a while loop. Again, my aversion to break statements, which is completely unfounded and there's no reason for it. But I would probably write a while loop that does this. It just says essentially while the names aren't equal, keep going, and it's going to iterate every time. At the end, and you'd have to have an or clause in there that stops it from going out of bounds. That's kind of beyond the scope of what we're doing here, so I won't bother with that at the moment, but just pointing out there's another way to do that. Okay, let's take another usage case of an array. Let's say that we don't know how big the team is or how many players are going to be on it. We want to get that information from the user, so I'm going to comment that out. So this is going to work a little bit differently. I'm going to just skip a couple lines to set this off visually. So now let's say that we're going to define this, declare this team array, but we're not going to say how big it is because we don't know how big it is. We're going to have to ask that. So I'm going to say int, oh sorry, I need a prompt first, system dot out print number of players, and well, this is a real Python way of writing this line of code that I don't really like, but it will say int num players equals, I missed, next int is the one I wanted. And just because I'm in the habit of doing this, I'm going to say input dot next line just to clear that buffer, because if I don't, I'm going to forget and I'll be wondering why my code doesn't work. I have to clear that buffer after we've gotten a number out of there. So now we've got a value, and this is how big we want the team to be. Now remember, we can't use an initializer at this point because we've already made the array, so I'm going to say team equals new. Notice I'm not putting this part. I'm not putting the string brackets because that's part of the definition of the declaration, I should say, of this array. I've already declared it, it exists. So, but I'm writing the rest of that line of code equals new string. And now instead of putting a literal number like 6 in there, I'm putting that num players. Okay, that's great, but we don't have any names in the array, right? We just got all those null pointers. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a loop to traverse through the array and collect input. Okay, so this will be like an input traversal. So same old traversal code here. Now what am I doing? I should just be copying the one right there instead of making watch me type. And what we're going to do now is we're going to say string. I'm not going to write it the Python way here, which would not use any new variables, but I'm going to write it the Java way or the teaching way. String new name equals nothing for now. And I'm going to prompt the user. Say input player name, and then we'll say new name is going to be equal to next line. And now I want to take that new name and put it into the array at index I. So team index I equals new name. Okay, I think that's going to do it, and then we're immediately doing a traversal after that, so we'll be able to see if this works. And I'm going to start with a low number because I don't want to do a lot of typing. So let's say 3 players, and let's say John, David, and Javier. There we go. John, David, Javier. Why did it say Javier twice? Do I have an error, or did I have just an extra line of code hanging out there? Oh, this is just a case of me being dumb. That Javier is my input from that line. So, which I probably could have avoided that confusion by using a print statement instead of a print line statement. Let's try that again just because that's a little embarrassing. I got to redeem myself here. Let's put 4 names. John, Marie, Vanessa. I don't remember the order we used before. Vanessa, David. There we go. There was nothing wrong except for my my brain not working correctly. All right, so that is a good example of an input traversal. And the last thing I want to show here is just an illustration of how we don't always have to go through these loops, just a straight traversal of 0 to length -5. We can have some variations of that might be useful for us. So for our input traversal here, let's reverse that. Let's say that for some reason we want to output the names in reverse order. So that is really the same idea here, but we're going to modify this statement, and we'll just fumble our way through it because that's what new students do, or new programmers do. Instead of starting at 0, we're going to say, well, I'm going to start at team.length. And by the way, as I work, some alarm bells hopefully are going off. So let's just switch those around. Now, I could run it and demonstrate this, but I'm going to tell you that I already have some problems here. By the way, one of the things I'm going to do in the interest of speed is I'm going to comment that out. And I'm going to comment that out. And I'm going to go back to just my pre-initialized array here. Should have done that one. I should have paused and done that, but okay. So we're going to, we're switching things around. So now we're going to start at team length, and we're going to go down to 0, and we want to go backwards. Now, there's a problem here. Let's run this and see what happens. Oh, I've got a different problem because I messed something up when I was uncommenting, I think. Oh, I was trying to declare that. Set the size of that. Okay, let's try that again. No, what else did I miss? Just missed on my editing. I will leave this stuff in the video just so you can see that I make all the same dumb mistakes that students make. It doesn't mean that I am dumb, although I might be, but it just means I made a dumb mistake. So we all do that kind of stuff. All right, so what has happened is the program ran, but I don't get any names output, and that's because there's more to it than just kind of switching the order of these. We need to start really at the length -1, remember? Because that is the last valid index. And we need to flip this sign because now we're going the other direction. And we're going to say as long as I is greater than 0, we're going to keep repeating. And let's see how that one works. Vanessa, Javier, David, Danielle, and Marie. And is that our complete list? No, we're missing John. So this is that oboe error, off by 1. We shorted it by 1. This says stop, keep going as long as we're above 0. But 0 is a valid index number. That's the first one in our array. So I need to say as long as we're greater than or equal to 0. And I think that's going to give us what we're after here. Okay, so that's an example of an array that goes through kind of in reverse order. And then I won't actually code these, but I'll just point out there's nothing that says we have to go through one at a time. Maybe we want to increase the price of every other one. So that would be I plus equals 2, right, instead of adding 1. So this is kind of your standard, what I would call your standard traversal, but you don't have to traverse your array in that kind of standard way. You can go through it backwards. You can go every other one or every 5th one or whatever you need to do to suit the purpose that you're to complete the task that you're after. This is another example where in this video I'm only having time to just scratch the surface of what we can do with loops in the context of arrays. But I've shown you the basic idea of a traversal. We can output stuff, we can input stuff, we can go through the loops in the arrays in different ways, we can search through an array, that kind of stuff, all the basics that we need. And certainly what we need for the assignments that you're going to get. We'll be asking you to use these skills, but to maybe do them in slightly different ways. So at this point, I would encourage you to go off and maybe try some of your own, try making some arrays and looping through them just to make sure you've got this down, and email me if you have any questions.